So who's first?
I will start with a small introduction, and then I will invite you individually. All right. So we go live in 5, 4, 3. Hello and welcome to this very special session of Spectra Plus. My name is Hemant Gaule, and I'm a part of the School of Communications and Reputation, India. This session is special because it is not uncommon for us to host leaders from across the globe at Spectra, but it is the first of its kind where the session comprises of representation from 5 different continents. And through the course of the next 60 minutes, we will be talking about the global communications education landscape, how turbulent this year has affected us, and what 2021 is likely to and should look like. And to discuss that with me will be a panel of 4 communications leaders, and it is my privilege to introduce our panel. We have Dr. Anna Addy, Professor of Public Relations at Quadriga University, Berlin. Anna is an academic, a researcher, a consultant, a speaker, and personally, I've been a big fan of her work, particularly her work in Women in PR and the Women in PR podcast, which you should check out. Anna, good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us.
Well, good morning to you, and thank you for having me.
We also have Jane Gitau, Secretary General, the African Public Relations Association, and Chairman and the first President of the Public Relations Society of Kenya, Nairobi. And besides that, Jane has donned several hats as a consultant, as an editor, as a researcher, and not least of all, as a trainer. Good afternoon, Jane, and thank you for being with us. Jane, do you have us? Do you hear us?
Yes, now I hear you. Thank you very much for having me. And,
well, it's our pleasure.
I look forward to the session.
We also welcome Dr. Rochelle Ford, the Dean of the School of Communications at Elon University, Elon. Rochelle was previously the chair of the PR department at the Newhouse School of Public Communications, Syracuse, where she helped the program to win the PR Week Education Program of the Year. It's 7:30 a.m. or 8 a.m., I think, in Elon, North Carolina. Rochelle, very good morning to you, and we are glad you could join us.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to this discussion.
And finally, we have Dr. Katharina Wolf, who is an associate professor at the School of Marketing at Curtin University in Perth, Western Australia. And she's also the coordinator of the Faculty of Business and Law's Public Relations program, with over 20 years of communications and media experience as an educator and industry professional, with experience spanning communications and research roles in Germany, Spain, and the United Kingdom and Australia. Katharina, it's really late in the evening there in Perth, and I'm so glad that you could join us. I hope you're having a great evening.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to this panel for agreeing to join us and partaking in this experiment. So let's jump right into it. This year has been really a jolt for us and forced a lot of us to reimagine and reinvent the way we do things. And there isn't a sector or domain which has remained untouched. Educational institutions like ours face their own sets of challenges, and so therefore, we really would like to understand how the pandemic impacted all of us. And therefore, can I invite our panelists to share some opening thoughts on the immediate impact of the pandemic on your respective education ecosystems, and discussing who were the afflicted stakeholders perhaps, and how were they affected? Anna, can we start with you?
Sure. Well, Germany is currently facing discussions about going into a second lockdown. And I would say, luckily, we have experience that we've gained from earlier this year. Your question was about the beginning of the year, so end of February, March, when the pandemic was confirmed and states took decisions on what to go about. For us, we've faced as a university a rather uncertain time in the first 2 weeks of March, when we were unsure about what the advice and both from the scientific community as well as the political community, so the regulatory framework, is going to be. And so that meant that we had to move rather transparently, but also to be prepared to postpone plans that we had made, particularly for March, rather quickly. So with the degree that I run, which is the MBA Communication and Leadership, we had planned a trip to Helsinki to visit our university partners there, and not only, towards the end of March. And it was so that at the beginning of the week, we were still discussing about traveling. And at the end of that same week, we had canceled the trip to be honest, to the relief of everybody. We've had numerous discussions at the time. The health and safety of both of our students and staff, as well as the health and safety of all of our counterparts, were utmost important. And so the decision that we had taken as a group in collaboration with our students, for instance, to postpone that trip was then very, very soon afterwards reflected by the political decisions and the scientific community. Now, moving forward, apart from canceling optional trips, several things happened to us. We had to think very much on whether we can deliver our courses in the format that we were used to. And again, the difference probably from the way we deliver our courses here in Berlin and to the colleagues who are joining us today is that we teach, I call it hiccups, apologies for that, but our MBA students tend to come to Berlin for intensive courses once a month. So we teach 9 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the evening for 4 to 5 days in a row. And so, of course, for us, the question was, can we keep these dates in everybody's calendar, lockdown and lack of travel, but can we deliver that sort of streamed content for, this numerous amount of hours? So I had a lot of technical questions, more than about the teaching ability and delivery, that were very much around health being, about comfort, about also, how do we connect? Can we connect? So at least the first 2 months after March, there's been quite a lot of testing going on here in Berlin on platforms, on connection, and it's been a very steep learning curve when it came to teaching formats. I'm not saying that we're having it perfect right now, but we are at a level where our courses and the feedback from our students, which we get after every course, they have maintained their academic quality. They have maintained their high level of inspiration and relevance to them. Yet we sort of managed to surpass this hurdle of exhausting them, because teaching online is utterly exhausting. So we've sort of managed to recalibrate in a sense in terms of what we include in our teaching and the breaks and the formats, that these long days are still enjoyable for them. So that's where we're at. We're still expecting to teach online until probably the end of March. And then all of us probably should meet again and have another conversation and see where we are.
Right. I think that's a very interesting perspective. Jane, how has it been at your end? Was it similar to the way Anna described?
Very similar, except I would say that they seem to have adjusted very well. Because in our case here, online learning, first of all, is not something that has really been widespread. Prior to the pandemic, it was one of those things that you did optionally as an option. So our infrastructure is not very well developed. And so after the lockdown was announced in March, it was like everything just went silent. And then gradually we began to ask, how do we reimagine our space? What is it that we can do? And so at St. Paul's, the university where I do spend some time teaching as well, we had been trying to get online, but more with distance students than with the regular everyday students. So we found ourselves in a space where we suddenly had to get the regular students studying online, and with poor infrastructure, with students scattered all over the country, one wasn't quite sure what was really happening there. So as teachers did the teaching. You could almost tell you only had half the class. And so for us now, the question is, how do we go on at all levels, really across all levels? How do we move on with those who didn't quite do what they were supposed to be? Some students are behind, others caught up. We've had online graduations because then those who are almost completing went ahead with online graduations. So it was an interesting sort of thing. There was the fatigue because, as Anna did observe, online teaching can be really, really exhausting. Yeah, so I wouldn't say we had a very smooth curve like Anne seems to have had, but we did try what we had to do. And that has really given us challenges, challenges for the future. That some of these things that we keep saying, or one of these days we should really try and go online on this one, now it is not an option. Now it's a question of we really must get the best infrastructure.
As far as infrastructure and learning curves are concerned, I suppose we are all still the steeper side of that learning curve, clearly. Rochelle, may I have some perspectives from your side as well? In terms of infrastructure, I imagine the challenges may not have been that great, but how was the reception of faculty, students to the lockdown?
Sure. So as everyone probably has seen with the United States, we really are the Wild West when it comes to our approach to the pandemic. So when it first hit, one of the biggest concerns for US institutions were all of our students that were studying abroad, because we really thought it was someone else's problem. And how do we get everyone home? And so that was the initial big rush, was to figure out how to bring all the US students studying all around the world back to the United States safely, because there was a big case of denial that it was going to affect the United States in February and March. Little did we know by the time we had our spring breaks that all of us across the nation, except for maybe one school, went to 100% remote education. And it was a huge shift because, like many other universities, the infrastructure, although we may have had the capabilities of doing online, it was more of bringing in guest lecturers who couldn't fly to our universities. So to have the instructors and to students to learn the technologies, to prepare their lectures, to videotape them, the question of back in the spring was, should it be asynchronous, where students will consume the lectures and things on their own and do readings and basically do discussion boards and things of that nature, or was it going to be synchronous live education and teaching? Much like the infrastructure of many other nations, we discovered that some of our students did not have the sort of access to strong broadband to receive and to do synchronous education. They were sharing now with their families where could they go to actually have classes and to make them run smoothly. So it was very much so a challenge in the spring. One thing that made me very, very happy about our communications educational community is that over the summer and even in the spring, people really started sharing resources. This is what worked, this didn't work. This is what, here are some best practices, lessons learned. And we saw that that sharing that made it much better as we entered into the fall and the start of classes again. But like I said, this is really where you saw major differences across the educational landscape in the United States, where you had some schools, particularly schools in California, went 100% remote, and only classes that that involved heavy technology like film and things of that nature were allowed on the campuses. Then you had other campuses that had hybrid approach, where some classes met face-to-face on campus, some classes met partially online, some classes met all online. And then you had other universities that opened up 100% on campus. And the challenge, particularly for those that decided to go the on-campus route, was making sure that we put in all of the necessary precautions to make that on-campus experience work. And so the investment in testing, the investment in PPE, you know, for protective mask and things of that nature, was a huge outlay of expenses. And the challenge now that we're facing, and I think it worked, each of those environments worked well. Elon was one of those places where we had all of the above occurring. We had some faculty, because of their high risk categories, that taught 100% online, and we had students that needed 100% online. We had some faculty, in order for us to do physical distancing in our classrooms, could only put half of their class physically in the room. So half would be online, half would be in class, and then we rotate, and the other half class would come in and the other half would be online. And then, of course, we had some classes that met 100% in person. The challenge now is the economic front of higher education in the United States. Those who decided to close the residence halls where students lived on campuses lost millions and millions of dollars in revenue, which oftentimes financially supported the academic enterprise. Those who decided to go 100, who were 100% on campus, the amount of financial expenditure to make it a safer environment was more money than they ever would have imagined that they would have to spend to teach safely. So no matter if the university opened or if a university went 100% online, each of them, including the most well-endowed universities, are hurting financially. And the question now is, where do we go in order to maintain, to sustain quality teaching and learning in the most healthy environment and appropriate for the students who choose our campuses?
Thank you, Rochelle. And I'm particularly fascinated by the point you said, where a lot of resource sharing happened by, I imagine, students and faculty, which helped everybody move together forward faster. Katharina, yours has been one of the most successful case studies of recovery and management of the situation. Did it seem so easy 8 or 9 months ago? And to what extent was this resource sharing a factor in your quick recovery?
I was quite lucky. I hosted an international conference in early February in Perth, and little did we know at the time that things would go pear-shaped so quickly. So we had a couple of speakers drop out, and literally within 2 weeks, everything changed. See, I'm the chair of our Public Relations Institute of Australia's National Education Committee, and as such, we've been kind of closely monitoring what's going on, but we're also quite aware how we've all faced quite different challenges across the country. We live in a country that's also a continent in its own right. It's obviously not as populous as the US, but we're talking about a broad mass of land. To the extent that, for example, my colleagues in Melbourne, they've been teaching exclusively online since March. They haven't been able to get back on campus without security detail. They're in an entirely different environment. Being based in Western Australia, Perth is quite often referred to as one of the most remote capital cities in the world. We've actually closed not only our international borders, we actually closed our state borders. We've literally only just reopened them last week. And not to the entire country. We discriminate quite quickly as soon as there's an outbreak. So effectively, we've been an island within an island for the last 8-9 months. And because of that, yes, we were impacted by a very quick turnaround within 1 week. Like everyone else, we had to shift everything online. The first semester was exclusively online for us, first half of the year. And that came with a number of challenges that we didn't expect. My students are part of something called the Global Communication Project. We're working with partners across 15 countries. Symposium to present to their real-life client. I was quite surprised how my colleagues in Europe still thought this was going to happen by June. And by then we kind of had an idea it's not going to happen from our end. So we had to shift literally everything online like everyone else. However, saying that, from our perspective, semester 2 has been very much back to normal. We've got lectures that remain online. We had to give students the option to study online. A lot of them chosen online and then realized it's actually not a good idea. And dropped off very quickly. But we're back on campus. I mean, I've been able to go on campus all year round. I've got small children at home, therefore I've been working on campus. So it's been a very different environment. And when people talk about first and second waves, I would say we didn't even have a proper first wave. So things are still going to come because we've been basically sealed off. Our biggest challenge is in some ways similar to the US, but also dissimilar, is the economic implication. And for us, that's international students. So international education for us is one of our largest export markets. I think it's second or third largest, depending on who you are. So international students are extremely important for us, and especially Asian students. So all of a sudden, we were dealing with students who quickly had to get planes back to the home country. We've had students who haven't been able to return, and especially our students, we've got a large cohort throughout Asia that might have technological issues in terms of access, as well as our local and regional students as well. But especially our Chinese students, we've got a large cohort there. Even with the best VPN set up, they struggle even now accessing resources. So it's been a huge, huge challenge, and it does reposition higher education in Australia, essentially. So everyone is scrambling quite madly now, and it's going to have a long-term impact on higher education in Australia as everyone's cutting back and trying to make sense of how we can essentially survive without the international student market, and that's only slowly coming back. So a number of challenges have really emerged. In one sense, we're quite protected, but in the other sense, we've also been cut off from crucial other markets.
An interesting perspective, and I suppose that's the ultimate question, is that which of these changes that we see around us are here to stay, even when things go back to normal. And which brings me to my next topic of conversation, which are teaching methodologies. And Anna, if we can get some perspective on specifically which teaching interventions worked in hindsight, and how receptive were your students, your faculty, and your administration to virtual and perhaps hybrid formats of teaching. And as a result of that, which of these teaching methodologies are we likely to retain, assuming that things do go back to normal next year?
Well, as I said, our format here as a university is slightly untraditional in the sense that we do not do day-to-day teaching, but rather these condensed modules. And so we did have, even before the pandemic, we did have a percentage of our teaching happening online in evening sessions. So very, but you know, they used to happen after the work time during the week. So usually evenings from 7 to 9. And they were recorded. So those were for us most of the time your traditional lecture teaching time, right? So when you prepared your slides and as a lecturer you conducted your class, and that used to be recorded as a default, meaning that whoever could not attend could use that material. The difficulty for us was with teaching these lump days, one after the other. As I said, our engagement with our students is very, very different, right? The class networks with one another in a very different way during these long days. And so for us, the problem was twofold. Was a technical one of whether we could find a platform that was stable enough to sustain essentially live streaming for up to 8 hours, you know, with 20 people and more during a day. And then the other was not necessarily technical, it was related to delivery. You know, could people resist? Literally, could people cope till the end of the day, let alone, you know, 3, 4, 5 days in a row? So several things happened. In the first few weeks of the pandemic, we played around with a bunch of platforms and tools. So that meant we have maintained teaching And we went with quite a clear and transparent message to everybody saying, look, we're learning, but we're not letting this go. So we've left everybody to use whatever platforms they were comfortable with on the teaching side and took the students along. But we've observed what worked, what didn't. And then kind of 2 months after, so in summer, we've made a clear cutoff and said, we're going to stick to this particular platform. And this is how we're going to get ourselves organized. And so that meant on our teaching side, we could provide information, clearer information and support to our guest lecturers, because some of the courses at MBA level, they have guest lecturers from the industry, and then that's that. But that also meant that we could then more clearly discuss with the students about what to expect. And so from the teaching side on these online long days, there are a couple of things we took. The necessity of people to be off camera. And so that meant on the teaching side that we needed to consider longer breaks than usual. When you're in the room, 5-10 minutes is enough. You know, you see everybody face to face and kind of thing. I see you anyways, might as well sit down because I want to go home at the end of the day. Whereas I like you, but not that much, right? This is that sort of thing. But then when you're online, it's right the opposite. You make me sit here nice and tight. My back hurts, my knees hurt. My posture is really bad. So it's exactly the opposite. You need to give time to people time to distance themselves. Not to mention that the screen eats up so much energy, right? We're focusing our eyes, and that we, both students and lecturers alike, and admin staff as well, we kind of realize we need breaks. Several of us spoke about terrible migraines post online teaching for such long days, and that was because of the effort. So long breaks, different sort of engagement, which meant that throughout the day, we now have a mixture of a bit of lecture, a bit of group activity, which means that students are given basically a time. Look, during these following 2 hours or following hour, here's your task. You can connect in a smaller group or call each other if you don't want to be on camera. And then we reconvene on camera with a lively discussion. And then they have individual tasks. When you say, look, off camera, everybody, this is the stuff that you need to solve, or you need to read, or you need to upload, and then we come back. So breaks, very, very important, mental well-being and balance. And we've worked very much under this agreement, really, with our students and classes, that if anything goes wrong, particularly for them, they're tired out, they need a break, they need to say it, because none of us will be able to catch it up. Even now, we have the luck that we see all of us 5, but when I have 20 students, you still see about 5 of them at a time. Now, one of the other things that we've done is that we have prepared quite a lot for hybrid teaching. And this is something that for us is going to stay. So for us here at Quadriga, working around our students' schedules in a way is very important, and making ourselves as flexible within reason is very, very important, right? Because they're professionals and they work and they have other commitments. So it's not just coming to school and such. And so this hybrid provision is going to remain, in the sense that, we always have students that for a reason or another cannot attend in person. But that brings a slew of other problems and challenges to both staff and students. In a sense, teaching fully online is okay. Teaching fully in the classroom is okay. Hybrid teaching is an animal of its own and brings the problems and the challenges of both worlds together. So we've, again, played with a bunch of technology. So the whole hardware acquisition, we had to go and do testing. Mind you, doing testing of microphones and camera angles and how you man them on your own, because we're a rather small university, so we're a one-man band, while having a mask on and making sure that your windows are open all the time. That was quite a challenge. And then make sure that you have basically at work the capacity of sustaining such a connection. So playing with technology, then it was trying to implement this in the classroom when you have this big screen behind you with everybody connected from home. and half of the screen sometimes is just with black cameras because people are tired and they just want to listen to you rather than have you seen them all the time. And then you have the audience in the classroom that you, and so one of the things we've learned from our students, for instance, is if we do group work in a hybrid format, rather do group work with the people that are in the room and do group work for those who are not in the room. Although from an educational perspective, and with this thinking that you want to integrate everybody, the thinking was, no, the way we're going to do it is that everybody is going to inherit a mobile computer, right? So a talking head or several, so that everyone would take someone who's remote into their group when they're in the room. That doesn't seem to work.
That doesn't seem to work. Okay.
No, because when you're in the room, you have a different sort of interaction and connection with the person. And when you're online, you have, the rules of engagement are slightly different. So to be able to focus on the task, it is much easier to keep people within their environment, because then technology doesn't come as a deal breaker.
Right.
And it doesn't come into, wait, I can't hear, you forgot to put your microphone on. Wait, your cat has just come into the camera, or, ooh, I'm just, whatever it is that might disrupt. So in that case, what does happen and what does help when you have hybrid teaching is to keep, for group activities, keep the online group online and keep the people in the classroom and bring them back in for the discussion, where really this exchange can happen. So,
Right.
You've asked a lot. Technology was always, manning technology has always been a challenge. So for all of us here in Berlin, it was very clear that this concept of the digital divide is as live and fine as ever. And digital divide doesn't necessarily have to do with people that have or do not have internet. It has to do with people who can cope with managing these tools. We're lucky in a sense to have a group of people who have internet here. Germany can be patchy sometimes, let's not go into that. We do have internet, we can connect. We do have the technology, so our students do have that. There wasn't any worry about that. But we do have different ways of going about it. And there are people who you would class them as native, so your digital natives and sort of your digital newcomers or renegades. And in this sense, that is very difficult for those who are not at a native level. If they have to focus on their teaching, making it excellent in their specialist area, and then have to come up on top with all these level of technology, because it's not only where do I connect, it's is my network strong enough? Am I in the right account? Have I switched the cameras on? Is my microphone having an echo or not? Have I actually muted my sound systems so that there's no echo? Where do I look? Are my slides to be seen? Are these uploaded? There's so many questions that for someone who's not used to having this sort of exercise and flexibility and was more comfortable with the face-to-face delivery, that is very, very challenging and puts a toll. So technology first, training colleagues, making it transparent to the students, and most likely this idea of hybrid teaching is going to stay, because it has taught us, and I promise I'm going to finish, taught us two things. That although in distance, so not physical proximity, is an advantage. And that is, I don't think that we've had such an international and wonderfully connected year with so many guests, both from the practitioner side and academic side, as we've had this year. So bad as it is, being unable to travel made us see the world and look for the world and connect with the world in other ways. And it also has forced all of us, staff and students alike, to seek a meaningful connection beyond these physical presences that we've had. So that's kind of it.
Interesting. Jane, can we come to you? How was the response, especially with, let's say, infrastructure deficit? And where do you see it going? Do you think there is going to be a focus and investment into infrastructure in order to perhaps prepare oneself better for this kind of methodologies, or are we all waiting for things to revert to as they were before?
Indeed, we're going to have, we've already started looking at infrastructure development where we can as a university. And one of the ways we did that was just to make sure that students are able to join us online. So we started giving them some money to pay for their connectivity because that was the only way they were going to belong to a class. The other thing we have learned is to have recorded sessions. We were so used to face-to-face, and even when we taught distance, it was more by email than anything else. And it has become very clear during the pandemic that online requires a bit more than that. Because you could have every intention of having a session, face-to-face, online face-to-face, as in connecting in real time. And then all sorts of things happen. You go off air, you cannot control the network, or you are the teacher in class and the students are away and cannot connect, and you don't want to have to go through this lecture 20 times. And so we've learned that it's important to pre-record lectures and classes ahead of time. So that's likely something that is going to go on with us. We never had any sort of hybrid. Because of course we are dealing with 4 crises in one. We are dealing with a health crisis, we are dealing with a political crisis, a social crisis, an economic crisis. I mean, this pandemic has been all crisis. And so education is one of those that is affected out of all this. And that meant in our case, we had a complete lockdown. We didn't have a choice whether we were going to school or not. You just had to stay home. So we never really at any point had hybrid classes. And schools still haven't gone back. Universities have, some universities have. And for some, going back to class means all the students are there, but especially the final year students. Anybody who's not a final year student is at home. And so we haven't had hybrid, if I could put it that way. But the other interesting thing we realized then to ensure interaction in class and to make sure people were with you and paying attention is that you no longer asked who's going to volunteer to answer this question. You one sort of has to pick on students, say, okay, Jane, now give us the answer to this. What do you think about this one, Hemant? And normally that is not something that is done in a face-to-face. You normally just said, okay, who's going to give us the answer to this when you're having a discussion? And because everybody is right in front of you, then you can see who's paying attention and who's not. So it has been very many lessons, but it has also been important to know, we are very much a social community. People have been affected, in more ways than one. So there are people who are completely traumatized. They've lost family members. They've been ill themselves. So absenteeism is now no longer just an issue of they didn't want to come to class. But being human has meant just trying to find out if you can what has happened, why they were not able to come to class. And just going the extra mile, talking to them on the phone and saying, I'm sorry, this has happened. So it's really called on us to go beyond ourselves. As we're looking at the classroom, you're also looking at this is a human being. And then you're also saying, this is how we improve the technology and other infrastructure for the future. So it has been a lot of learning also, and just making students also read a little bit more, and everybody just having to work on their own abilities to just connect better. Because for us, before the pandemic, I never had a Zoom, for example. And yeah, I knew there were online platforms, but I used them to connect with friends rather than for professional purposes. Maybe once in a while you Skype for business. But this has just meant we have to understand the whole
Right.
set of applications and how to use them, and then making choices, which is better than which. And of course, when we started using Zoom, which was totally new, again, nobody knew what to do. Sometimes we were interrupted. There was hacking, and so we had to start investing more on online security and, again, information sharing, which platform is safer than which one. So it became a cooperative, a sort of, corporate knowledge that we were all seeking and sharing with each other.
Right. Interesting for
so,
that.
yeah.
Rochelle, I think from your perspective, there has been a larger intention to go back to campus learning. Is that a correct assessment to make? And therefore, what is being done in that regards to make sure the methodologies are in place?
Yeah, so across the country, there is a big push to reopen campuses. And what we actually found too in most campuses around the country, because we incorporated the physical distancing, 6 feet apart desk, smaller class sizes, everyone, mask, that there was no real spread within the classrooms, that the classroom was actually one of the safest places you could be in the US because of all of the physical distancing and wiping down of surfaces and the masking. So we found that what wasn't necessarily safe are all the social gatherings that 18 to 25-year-olds like to do, which tend not to be masked and physical distancing. So that has been the big question for universities here, is how do you bring all of these students back when their frontal lobes and decision making are not necessarily formed and good, so that you can have the kind of engaged learning that a U.S. education is known for. One of the things too that is a common highlight of public relations and communications education are internships, apprentice, and things of that nature. And with corporations and NGOs and everyone working remotely for the most part, and even like people, we oftentimes even had internships at hospitals and things, the professional staff are not there. They're all remote as well. So how do we maintain internship environments and experiences when students can't learn corporate culture by being on the ground? And that was a big question. So one of the things that we will continue to allow are virtual internships, but how do we create new assignments and things and observations so that students can have just as rich of an experience, be it very different. And part of that was not just preparing the students to go into a virtual work environment, but it was also preparing the employers to be willing to take on students in this virtual environment. So some of us have come up with best practice guides for both the employer and for the students, to learn how to engage in this very, very important space. And the same thing when it comes to the collaborative assignments, like Anna was describing, how do we have people work in teams differently? Giving faculty members the ability to drop into team meetings that might be held virtually, or should we mix them up, as you heard earlier, with some students face-to-face and some students online? How do we negotiate that? But I do think that we discovered that being virtual isn't always bad. Like, there is a lot of value. When we thought about what does it mean to create global citizens, it doesn't always mean you have to travel to another country. You can have client projects and teams and things with other nations and be able to collaborate with clients and things globally or nationally that they would not have been able to do before. So to some extent, the adjustments that we made, be it internships, group projects, speakers, etc., has had added benefit that we ordinarily were kind of thinking very narrowly about what students could do and how it could be done. So I think that there's benefits and lessons learned that we can carry forward from there. But the other thing that has been two other real challenges, I think, that we face is mental health. And people are zoomed out. That's what we say now. I'm zoomed out. I need to unplug. Like I can't be on another call. And so what we've discovered is the telephone now has become a favorite friend again, because we don't want to be staring at our computer. But how do we take care of our students' mental health? How do we check in with them? Whereas before, faculty, there's a nice amount of distance between your students and yourself. But if you have a student who's not coming to class, who never has their camera on, how do you check in with that person to make sure they're okay, making referrals to health providers and things like that without overstepping your bounds, because it is very real, and that human part is very important. The other big challenge that we faced here in the US, but became a global pandemic too, is dealing with the Black Lives Matter movement and the racial tensions and things that exist in the United States. And globally, because there's colorism around the world, where people who are Black and brown, no matter what nation they're in, tend to be disenfranchised or discriminated against, and aren't able to achieve their fullness, globally. And so when we dealt with the and continue to deal with this racial tension in the United States, so many of our faculty were ill prepared, had never thought about issues of race, issues of ethnicity, issues of real power, and the negative impact that has, not just on society, but even within the public relations and communications industries. And the faculty not only were dealing with how to figure out how to teach online, hybrid, face-to-face, masked, what have you, but how do you now really seriously incorporate these issues that they themselves are not comfortable with talking about, never have really ever researched or read about, but must absolutely begin to confront them in the classroom. And when you look at our industries, the public relations industry in particular, we're breaking down walls of women, but we have yet to break down the walls of racial and ethnic equality, parity, and progress. And that became a real pandemic that we had to deal with, and we continue to deal with. But again, it has been refreshing to see issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion being discussed in academic circles, people sharing resources, creating lessons and readings and things that are helping the faculty to navigate that. But those are conversations that are difficult. It's a journey that everyone has to take in understanding diversity, equity, inclusion. But it's more difficult when someone doesn't have their camera on and you're trying to have a discussion that's on a very heated area of issue. Is it because they don't want to deal with it? Is it because of internet? What is it because of? Is it disrespectful when you're trying to have these really difficult conversations? And so I bring that up, of the emotional fatigue that is occurring with being zoomed out, as well as having to deal with the real tensions and the reckoning that our public relations and communications industry are having to make in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because when I looked at the profile of all our panelists, there's one thing that connects all of us here is your passion and contributions you have made towards diversity and inclusion. And it's something perhaps that can be a topic of our next conversation if we meet again. Coming back to Katharina, on you have the advantage of actually looking at the entire episode over the last 9 months, of things reverting to a certain level of normalcy. And you have had the option of maybe keeping some of the methodologies you used during the pandemic and an option of letting go of them. What has been your perception? What do you think you would like to retain?
It's been interesting what we've observed, but also what university management really wanted us to do. We've got in Australia very few career academics teaching in public relations. So overall, most of the academics in PR here have got extensive industry experience, and therefore teaching generally tends to be quite hands-on, very engaged. We've got a lot of work integrated learning, industry speakers, and so on. So generally, you'd see very few lectures, a lot of hands-on teaching. For us, it was really the university leadership that pushed that like-for-like exchange of whatever you teach face-to-face, you have to replicate in an online environment up front. And that was really hard. I teach 3-hour interactive seminars, not as long as Anna does, but it was, you can't keep someone's attention, especially not a 17, 18-year-old's attention for that long and make it meaningful. And it was interesting. Our Pro-Vice Chancellor, within 2 hours of going fully online, sent a message out congratulating everyone of transforming completely and going digital, and that's the future forward. So it was really interesting, and we actually now seen that pushback where we've got a lot of first-year students to say, I feel really shortchanged. I was looking forward to the university environment. I missed out. You ruined my first year. And then we also got our year 12 students that are about to go into university, and they're actually getting quite critical. They're rethinking their options. And at the moment, across the board, we've seen this move by universities to more online, and students do not like it. They actually do not want this. Not all of them, but a lot of them don't want it. So it's quite interesting. The other interesting thing I found is that the argument, and we actually had a discussion about that in a town hall meeting 2 weeks ago even, where management says, well, we know students after week 3 tend to kind of drop out of lectures. Yes, they do, but nobody actually looks at the analytics of online delivery. There's an awful lot of online material that nobody ever engages with, but we don't actually look that far. So it's this assumption that just because something is online, it's got to be good, and it's not. So initially for us, that was that move to do that like-for-like exchange. I've traditionally taught blended. But I also teach interactive workshops. I get students to run focus groups in class. I get them to go out on campus, do observations. Extremely hard when you're online, go outside, have a look around and come back. So it's actually been quite tricky. What I also found is that in second semester, when students had the options, a lot of opted for online for convenience purposes, but then they disappear because it's so difficult. Well, it's easy to fall through the cracks, but it's difficult to catch up with students when they're fully online. So I was really concerned about students really falling through the cracks and disappearing there. So some of the key observations I found, really the one-size-fits-all model really as the university tries to push really doesn't work. We haven't got a magic formula that covers everything from engineering to, I don't know, film and television. Synchronous teaching, I've learned, may not be the best solution. When that push came on to fully online delivery, my concern was really that when a pandemic strikes, everything changes. We can't assume students are available for the same time slot as they were before. They might have to care for loved ones. They might have to return home, travel into regional areas, other countries, as we've had. Some students had travel bans in place. They could actually not even go to their closest supermarket because there was a border all of a sudden. They might get sick themselves and can't attend live sessions. They might have to find alternative work. A lot of them work dried up because they were working in hospitalities. And internet services aren't really that reliable, to the extent I had a student sitting in our library on campus and she kept on dropping out because the internet on her phone and on campus wasn't reliable enough. We had a student sitting in Sarawak in a tree trying to get, there's a photo going around, trying to get a signal somewhere up there. So what I found, what was really important, is to have a combination of synchronous and asynchronous content. To allow students to have that flexibility, but also to have that option to engage live, because a number of my colleagues have just mentioned that need to engage and to be able to connect. And we don't want to lose that. What I also found helped me really is to have short, sharp updates via social media. We know our students at least hang out on Facebook. And I didn't want them to get the idea that I'm just rolling out what I had kind of prepared anyway. So I always make sure I contextualize everything, and I actually provide some feedback on what's going on, provide some pointers so they could actually engage live and they could watch it back. And that really helped for us. I found, especially with the postgrad students, interestingly enough, I find especially our PR students really value that face-to-face engagement. I've asked them on a number of occasions, do you want to go fully online? And they all go, no, we need this engagement. It prepares us for our future roles. We need to actually engage. And then again, it's that sense of belonging. I had quite in the beginning, actually, I dropped into a collaborate session in a breakout session with students, and they both kind of took a step back, kind of metaphorically, and went, oh, I'm really sorry, we had to catch up. We haven't seen each other for so long. And my reaction was, well, that's fine. You actually need that space. You would normally catch up in the corridor or before class. Where can we provide these spaces for students? So what have we learned out of it? I organised a panel just a couple of weeks ago about the future of international education, and everyone was kind of talking up what was going on. And then we had our Pro-Vice Chancellor from our Singapore campus come on board. And that was really interesting because her point was, we haven't done really well. We actually haven't. Our students have been really forgiving. They've let us get away with a lot, but they won't allow us to do that in the future. Which I thought was really good to actually hear that. So just because we move online, that's emergency online delivery. That doesn't mean it's pedagogically sound, good online teaching. And I think we need some pushback to actually demonstrate that and communicate that to management and industry leaders, that we need that support, and that we also need to consider, if you want more online content, I know for us a lot of work and a lot of resources go into creating a vibrant campus community. We've got an amazing place activation team on campus, giant board games, live bands, name it, it's all here. But what are we doing about our online campus experience? Nothing's really happened in that space. So if we really want to move more online in future, we need to really invest in that space and rethink it.
Right. And I personally am glad to hear that there seems to be a consensus here and generally in academia as well, that we need to go back to that pedagogical method. And there are those methods that work, and they may not work specifically for communications education or education in general. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how our academia engages with the industry. And since a large number of the delegates who are probably watching this a couple of weeks from now are professionals from the industry, it's important for them to get a perspective as well on what does the academia expect from the industry, and therefore the nature of the engagement that we must build. And for example, what are some of the areas of research which are likely to be crucial, where we can help the industry understand what's the best way forward? So Anna, may I ask from your experience, you have rolled out a lot of research and white papers in the past 1 or 2 years. So what do you think is the way forward?
Well, I think collaboration between industry and academia is vital. And one of the reasons some of the research that I've been working on or collaborated with other researchers in past years has been put into the public domain is because of this deep entrenched belief that knowledge shouldn't be shared behind paywalls. I mean, if we want all of our academia and all of our profession to catch up and be respected internationally as well as nationally, you cannot play and have these discussions within, walled communities or national boundaries. So that's one of the reasons why I've promoted these sort of ideas. The other idea, and the reason why I've published so much into open spaces, is to dispel a myth that academia lives in an ivory tower. That we get ourselves busy with the ideal of the profession, but have no understanding whatsoever of what happens in the real world. That is not true. All of us here have consultancy experience and work experience In Germany, there's a little bit more specificity. So if you want to be a professor at a private university, there's a state mandate that you have to prove. So it's not enough to say it. You have to document and prove your industry experience. And there's a threshold that you need to make. Otherwise, you don't get, so you have to have the PhD and years of professional experience. And believe you me, to reach this as a young age is very, very difficult, right? Which is why you either get in universities practitioners, or you tend to get, doctors and not in between. But anyways, going back to what we could do together is understand that there's benefit in collaboration and learning. And that there's benefit in the thoroughness, right, and the pedantry of the academic research method. One of the things that I keep telling to my students is that what they focus on work is solving, problems and giving solutions, and they do not bother to explain all the whys, all the process. Therefore, their solutions are marred with a ton of assumptions based on, or made about their sample, made about who reads their stuff, made about, what is understood or not understood. So a collaboration between academia and industry is necessary, where industry learns to mimic the pedantry of academia when it comes to accuracy of sample and research methods, because that is, where the transparency and credibility comes from. What industry can do for the academia is open doors and agree to collaborate and integrate research instead of lifting their nose up because it's, we're in ivory towers. I'm saying that because I remember just recently participating in an online Twitter chat, and there were several of us academics with these hybrid profiles, if you want. And there were several participants who were in the industry. And this myth has been repeated to an irritating level that academia has no understanding of the world. Yet these people, and I don't want to, go around gender lines, but these people kept on referring on how ill-prepared university students pursuing public relations degrees were, but they had PR agencies. And of course, the more I talk about it, the more my heart rate increases. You cannot have that. You really cannot have that, to have a system where you have education that is supposed to have the profession and then you kick it because it doesn't fit in whatever it is. So collaboration is necessary. Understanding that the scientific academic process and research is founded, and then opening doors, no matter how small the research is still better than no research. So that's, I think,
right.
And yeah, not leaving it behind a paywall. I mean, we spoke about how you and I and all of our colleagues here engaged very often with other colleagues around the world. And we go back to the digital divide. Not everybody has access when it comes to research, either to resource or even more to funding to go into all these highly licensed, wonderful libraries. And so what are we doing? We publish in a reputed journal for ourselves. That's not going to be seen by the industry. That's not going to be seen by other colleagues in the world where this knowledge, there's hunger for knowledge. But yeah, it's good for our managers. So.
Right. I hope that the mindset changes as well. Jane, coming over to you, you've been at the fulcrum of where industry meets academia. What are your insights on this, the nature of this engagement, and how it's likely to be in 2021?
We certainly need a lot more collaboration. I think we are at that point where industry and academia only meet each other during events and when students need to go out on attachment. And I am one of those advocates that insist on greater collaboration, because having one foot in academia and one foot in industry, I know that we have differences that we need to bridge, with their gaps that we need to bridge. For example, industry could develop for us a lot more case studies than we have. We have some local case studies published. We have some local authors that we use, but our books are overwhelmingly American and British. So it is important for us to begin seeing how we train our students to be able to work in our local context. And I'll give you an example of media relations, for example. When you're looking at classic things like media relations and you're looking at an American case study, there will be morning newspapers, evening newspapers, afternoon newspapers. When in a typical Kenyan, typical African situation, you probably have 2 or 3 daily newspapers published in the morning, and that is it. While I know that in terms of media, social media has come in, and Twitter, Facebook are sort of narrowing that gap, there is still need to contextualize, and really good context, the context of where we are, the context of where we're working, the context of where we're living, provides a lot of, or should provide a lot of what we're teaching our students. So I think industry needs to be open a lot more to just allowing students in and out of their offices, but also a lot more in just being open to having their work put out there in terms of research, in terms of documenting case studies, so that we're not struggling, and students are not struggling with this concept of 20 newspapers and then ending up with 1 or 2 and wondering what was it they taught me in school. We still have a lot of that. And so I would want to see greater collaboration, and I think it is a necessity to see greater collaboration, particularly in that area. Another area that I think I'd like to see greater collaboration in is in terms of resource sharing, what facilities are available? When we say that universities are poorly resourced in terms of online infrastructure, what can the communication companies do? What can other organizations and other companies where these students are going to work? You know, what can their contribution be? So that we're not training students out there for an industry out there that has no clue, that simply criticizes. We have a lot of criticism of what the universities are producing. So that gap needs to be closed. We need to bridge that gap a lot more. So, and I think for me, the lessons, again, going forward, more conversations, more collaborations. And now we have learned we don't have to be physically sitting together in a room at an event. We can actually have a lot more conversations going on online. So if some managers are available 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, we can have those conversations and say, okay, can we have this same conversation with our students online? I think those are some of the things I'd want to be looking at going
Thanks
forward.
for that, Jane. And Rochelle, do you see it changing in that sense? Like Jane pointed out that now it's a little easier. Do you see some conducive factors for industry academia collaboration? And specifically, what do you think are the subjects and the topics on which these collaborations could happen from a research perspective?
So I do see more collaboration than we have in the past. We look at groups like the Institute for Public Relations Research, where it really is becoming that intersection of the academic scholars and making it really translatable and accessible to practitioners, and practitioners saying, professionals saying, this is what we need. These are the topics and things that we need greater insights on. And so that those research projects from a basic level can inform the practice and be more, universities can be more of a teaching hospital approach where we're solving real problems that'll help our industries work and be better. I think that there's still opportunities, as Anna and Jane said, of collaboration. So for instance, our students are learning how to do data analysis, social media analysis, network analysis, et cetera. But one of the things that we have difficulty teaching is we don't have the data sets that would be meaningful to do the kind of research that we could really help prepare that next generation of communications professional who understands data, because we don't have big data sets where we could take the social media listening and translate it into sales. Like, because you can, maybe the university will allow us to use admissions data, but it'd be much better if we could work with a local company or nonprofit or what have you, and that we could problem solve together, and to have that sort of access. The other thing that I think is another area where we could use more, and is that some of these analytic providers, there's been so much turnover and consolidation, and a lot of these new companies that are working alongside of our communications industries in terms of data analytics, they have no social responsibility in their body. And so instead of partnering with us to develop tools to teach the students on how to use their software, be engaged with it, they want to be a sales proposition, and universities around the globe don't have the money and, to buy these things so that we can teach it to make our students more competitive. So again, partnering, giving us a seat or two from the technologies that they use would enable our students to be able to use it and then make them more marketable upon graduation. And then another area of investment where I think we're seeing a little bit more, of course, is doing paid internships and opportunities, because students can't afford oftentimes to do apprenticeships or to go to major cities and things to get that kind of work experience. So making sure that it's paid. And it's getting better. Like the Council of PR Firms in the United States voted that all of its members must pay their intern. Well, unfortunately, some people have dropped their membership because they didn't want to pay the students. So shame on those companies. Definitely no one is one of those. But the Arthur W. Page Society has also made that commitment that those member companies would pay their interns. But also giving faculty the opportunity to come in and work, observe, so that they too can keep their professional skills up to date. And we're seeing some of that happening. And then the final area where I think that we're seeing a little bit of growth, but we need to do more, is investing in scholarships, because there's a huge opportunity for us to provide diverse talent along social economic levels if we would have companies and agencies willing to invest in the students so that they can go to nice universities and be well prepared for the industry, as well as funding to support research projects that would be the kind of translation of research that would have real impact on the industry as well. So funding, internship paid, both for faculty and students, as well as access to data and analytic tools.
Thanks for that, Rochelle. Katharina, coming to you. How has the culture of this kind of collaboration been in Australia or Oceania generally, and where do you see it headed for 2021?
What's really interesting for us now is we're redefining kind of what higher education is going to look like in the future without the international students at least flooding back too quickly. This has kind of sped up the whole discussion and kind of revived it around the role of higher education. And there has been a call from quite a few senior people to do more teaching and less research, because who needs research? And there's senior people in academia, which I'm quite taken aback by. But we've seen that trend where there's certainly that push towards more teaching, less research. So there's certainly a lot of work to be done in that space and differentiate universities from vocational colleges. I'm actually, and as my colleagues have kind of voiced, I'm taken aback by some of the hostility from industry. I work very closely with industry, always have. In WA, we're quite close, but especially the large agencies quite often I find to draw on the value of higher education themselves in most cases, but then all of a sudden become very hostile and critical about the role of higher education and the role of research and the apparent lack of us preparing students for their first job. rather than actually looking forward to look at long-term skills, lifelong learning skills, and the role of industry within that. So what I find industry quite often, not everyone, we've got some amazing industry partners, but quite often industry uses that excuse of university not being relevant and therefore doesn't actually contribute either. What we very much pushing here at Curtin is that whole idea of demand-driven research. So very much looking at what does industry need, how can we actually collaborate and respond to that and solve some of those challenges. I use a lot of industry clients within classes for projects, but I would love to see taking that a step further and see more action research actually within an HDR context, building that kind of understanding what can be done. And there are some pockets where that happens, but not as much as it really could do. I think the whole idea of a global pandemic and COVID-19 has really highlighted how we don't draw on the expertise of academia. I mean, I'm looking at a country that's very much focused on advertising as a key communication channel, mainstream media channels, and everything's very much information distribution based. What we failed to do, or the government has failed to do, is to really look at what we've learned from past pandemics. What have we learned from your SARS, from your Zika virus, your H1N1? What has come out of that, and what can we actually use to take us forward? So that's where I really see the role of academia in terms of pushing that information back to government, say, hey, we actually know what works, what doesn't work. We actually know how to engage with multinational, multicultural communities, rather than just poorly translating a text-based message. How about actually involving the community, getting them on board, as we've seen us work with HIV/AIDS? How can we actually draw on that expertise that already exists? So I see academia really as a boundary span, and we need to push back quite hard and need to get that road in to inform current practice. So that's where I really see the role of academia in terms of voice of reason to inform practice, and increasingly within a public communication space.
Right. Well, I certainly hope that we inch forward in that direction. I come to my last question now, and what I want is a quick, perhaps a rapid fire round on what you all feel to be will be the communications trends in 2021. Perhaps a couple of skills, if you can identify which skill areas will be important for communicators to have in 2021 as a result of the year that we have had. Anna, starting with you, what trends do you see in 2021?
Oof. Not always a great thing to be the first. I think there are two areas here when we talk about skill. And so I'll go back to the study that we ran last year, PR 2025, where we asked practitioners to name that, and digital literacy was an area, a bigger area of competence, and so that includes, within digitalization and digital literacy, you also talk about ethics, and that comes also with research. So that is understanding what goes into the operationalizations of elements of algorithmic thinking. So I think that's one that's not going to leave us, but I think something else that we need to sort of teach ourselves has to do with resilience, with coping with something that is different. And that is a lot more, the repercussions of the results of that are to be seen on mental health and well-being and balance. So I think both for professionals and academics alike, one of the big results and lessons probably of 2021, of 2020 to 2021 is not going to be that we know that we can meet and teach online, but rather that we learn to say no. And in order to keep this balance, in order to keep the wider, longer term perspective in mind. So digitalization with everything that comes with it, but also resilience and balance. So that would be my take.
All right, thanks for that. Jane, over to you. What are 2 or 3 things that you see are going to be the trends?
Number one, I think we must focus more on crisis management. In my part of the world, crisis management tends to be a specialized area for particular practitioners. But this pandemic has taught us we had to put everything down and concentrate on the crisis. So what are the skills and the tools that we need for crisis management? The second thing is scenario creation. You know, we have to visualize, we have to ask ourselves, what is the best option? What is the next best option? What is the option not to take? Again, I think this kind of creativity, we haven't paid too much attention to it in my part of the world. And then the third thing we must do is read and write. Read what are others doing about it and get to write and write and write. And writing in this case, because we have to put forward our thoughts, our perspectives, our solutions, our challenges, but we are putting them out in different contexts. So what are we putting out on social media? What are we putting out in other media? What are we putting out for our different publics? And these are the three things that I really think I could add to the list that has already been given.
Thanks for that, Jane. Rochelle, your point of view?
I will never disagree with Jane. Writing. It's not going anywhere. And how do you cut through the clutter, makes content creation in a creative way is continually important. But I do think that really harnessing the power of analytics as we all move into this virtual space, how do we use that, move with that, because everyone is now operating online. But probably the most important thing now more than ever is trust and fighting dis and misinformation. And I think that if we do not figure out as professional communicators how to restore trust and how to fight dis and misinformation, our societies are in a really greater problem than we can ever begin to imagine.
All right, thanks for that, Rochelle. And Katharina, what do you think?
There's so many points I do agree with. The other big one, and adding to ethics for me, is to measurement and evaluation, actually being very clearly able to demonstrate and communicate the value of public relations. We're quite often the poor cousin there and don't actually manage to get that cut through. Certainly here, advertising is still way ahead of where we are, and it's not the getting caught up in shiny new things or influencers and so on. Beyond that, I actually see a role for us to draw on a broader range of skills. Here's always a discussion. Most PR degrees are in humanities. They've just been taxed high and actually moved up a bracket. We're based in business. I really see a future in combining those different perspectives. We've got a lot of students on both ends, and I find it really important to have the business skills and the language there, but also the critical thinking that seems to come more from a humanities arts perspective. So actually getting together, bringing different elements of university together rather than working in silos. And finally, addressing all those different areas, I think over the next few years, we're going to see an even greater focus on just-in-time learning, more short courses, more micro-credentials, industry professionals who seek to upskill but do not have the time to enroll in an entire degree or might just want to try that out. So I think that there's going to be far more demand on doing short, sharp, just-in-time learning that addresses those current kind of challenges and trends around mis and disinformation, AI, ethics, and so on.
Right. Thanks for that, Katharina. I certainly hope that we can make some progress on those fronts, and perhaps with the insights that we have from our engagement with the industry, these efforts become more fruitful. And that brings us to the end of our discussion, and what a crucial one it has been, since whatever happens in our educational institutes and ecosystems will govern the future of communications practices also. So I'm really grateful to our panelists for joining us from 5 different time zones for this conversation. Thanks also to Reputation Today and all partners of Spectra for helping us create this platform. To our delegates who are probably watching this a couple of weeks from now, I hope you found this useful and insightful, and I hope you are taking away some food for thought for the way we engage on talent and research. Thanks once again for joining us, and thanks Anna, Jane, Rochelle, and Katharina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hemant.
Yeah.
Thank you.